Ready to go. Hey guys, what is going on? And welcome to episode 3 of the Fortem Training Podcast with me, owner and head coach of Fortem Training, Kieran Douglas Jones. We are outside today. We're outside in this one. The weather is being kind, although there are quite a few clouds passing over. So if at any point, for those of you that are watching, if it does go a little bit dark, it is because there is a cloud passing over and covering the sun while we're out here just outside the garage gym. For the benefit of the listeners, to the right of me is the garage gym. We are outside in the backyard, the back garden. Nice view of some trees behind me. Yeah, so soaking up all the vitamin D. But anyway, let's get into it. So today's podcast, talking a little bit about, I know I spoke in the first episode about a few things that would probably integrate into the podcast as and when I got into them. And so today we are going with what I've read slash listened. That's sort of, we're covering that in 2-in-1 today because the what's the right word? It's an audiobook. So technically it's read. You could read it because it is a book, but I listen to it because I better consume audio compared to actually reading, which is something that I found out probably more recently, over the last couple of months. Sort of found out that I really do find it much easier and I'm much more effective at consuming audio and that compared to reading. Even though I spent a lot of time reading books, I just found that listening to podcasts, and then just 2 weeks ago I think I started using Audible, and it is now my new best friend. So today the first audiobook that I listened to, the Chimp Paradox. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk a little bit about that first, then something that I have watched in last 10 days or so. I've actually watched this twice, so it's a pretty good resource and it's quite an interesting one. Then, just before we head off to a little break, I'm going to talk a little bit about my current training and why my current training looks the way it does. Oh, sneeze. Excuse me. Oh. And then, so that's going to lead us just up into a little break, and then after the break, I'm going to talk a little bit about a client interaction that we've had this week, which will talk a little bit about consistency over perfection. So yeah, get things started. Up first, my resource, read slash listened audiobook, The Chimp Paradox. The author escapes me. I cannot remember for the life of me the name of the author, but The Chimp Paradox, pretty popular book that I'm sure a number of you listening will have read. If not, I highly recommend it. And what The Chimp Paradox says is that inside of your brain you have a chimp, which is your emotions, or for some extent your irrational emotions. For the most part, your negative thoughts, or most of your negative thoughts, come from the chimp. Then you have your rational self, which is the person that you want to be, which is your human. And then you also have the computer. To explain where I'm at in the book currently, I am on chapter 8, and so I'm a little under halfway. I think I'm 4 hours into the audiobook, which is, I think it's just under 10 hours. So I'm a little under halfway, so I'm not fully versed in the Chimp Paradox as yet, but up until now, working on the basics of what I have listened to and what I'm going on, it's super interesting. It's a very interesting book. It gives a really it's sort of an interesting concept in that you have a chimp which controls your emotions and sort of that voice inside your head that tells you don't want to do something or tells you how to react. The example that used quite frequently in the book, in the audiobook, is someone cuts in front of you while you're driving. Someone cuts in front of you, the chimp immediately slams on the horn, drives right up behind the car that's pulled in front of you, really makes a nuisance of yourself, really tells the person in front what you thought, compared to your rational self, your human, which would just let it go. And apologies, a little bit windy, a little bit of rattling going on here. Just for the there we go. yeah, compared to sorry about that. It was just things flying everywhere. It's a little bit windy out here. Hopefully, it's not affecting the audio too much. But yeah, compared to your rational self, which would just let that go, and it really doesn't affect your day in the grand scheme of things. That sort of thing, someone pulling in front of you, really does not affect your day whatsoever. So your human is sort of your rational self that will tell you to get on with your day, and the Chimp Paradox is all about sort of managing that chimp and managing those negative emotions and trying to negate them, or trying to manage the chimp as much as you possibly can, so that your human, your rational self, can lead the way and point you in the direction that you want to go. I definitely think that if you haven't read it or listened to it, The Chimp Paradox is a very, very good book that I think you definitely should. So up until now, I'm only chapter 8. I'm about just under halfway through, and I would highly, highly recommend it. Please do go and give that a read or a listen, whatever it is. It's super interesting. If you are interested in sort of mindset and that sort of thing, and that sort of the mindset kind of stuff really interests you, then you will definitely love this book. You will definitely enjoy it. It will be of great value. So sort of what I have taken from it, and something that I have noticed in myself, whether it is voluntary or maybe partly involuntary, but some of it is voluntary, and I can see it happening within myself with some things that I don't like doing, is if I have got something on my list for the day that I don't usually like doing, in the past I would have put it off and put it off, and the chimp would have told me, I don't want to do this, I really don't want to do it, I don't want to do it now, we can do it later, put it off, we'll do it, come back, sort of bury your head in the sand kind of thing. Not out of my own fault, it's just that on that list, with many other things to do as well, the stuff that I didn't enjoy doing would get dropped down to the bottom, and I would just go with the stuff that I do enjoy. But since listening to the book and listening to the audiobook, I've definitely found a difference in that I can make myself work through things that I perhaps don't necessarily enjoy doing quite so much, by way of managing those negative thoughts, managing that chimp, as they call it in the book, and managing that chimp and managing the thoughts that come from the chimp, and telling myself through the human that these things need to be done. They're not actually that bad. They're not really that bad. It's if I want to continue to progress, and if I want to continue to move forward, then I will have to do them and get them done, whatever the case, whether I do enjoy them, whether I don't enjoy them. But I think for me, for the most part, the stuff that comes from the chimp very often sort of, I don't want to say exaggerate, it's over-exaggerated, it's in terms of things that I don't like doing, because there are things I don't like doing, and off the top of my head I can't really just think of one straight away, but actually yes I can. Actually yes I can. Sometimes, not that I don't like doing it, I reply to all comments on Instagram and reply to all DMs, but sometimes I will sort of go and leave them accumulate a little bit and then answer them blocked at once. Somewhat of a bad habit, although I am trying. That is one thing that I have definitely made a big change on since listening to the Chimp Paradox. Is what would happen is I'd get a comment and Chimp would just tell me, I don't want to do that now, I'll just do it later on, and then I would come back to it later on and I would go, I don't want to do that now, I'll do it later on. And that would continue for a couple of days, sometimes even up to, in the past, months ago, would have gone up to a couple of weeks, where I either wouldn't answer messages or reply to comments. But something that I have implemented straight away, and I have implemented since starting the audiobook, is that in particular, when I do see comments, I will try and reply by the end of the day that it comes in, or if I do get messages, I will try and reply by the end of the day that the message comes into me, so that I don't leave them accumulate and then have to take longer periods of time to go through and answer them all, go through and reply to them all, like all the comments and that sort of thing. So that's one implemented change that I have made since reading the book, and I think if that is the only change that comes from it, then it is a very positive one. Nevertheless, it is a positive change. But I definitely think throughout the course of the rest of the book, and that isn't the only example that I have in terms of changes that I've made, and in being able to better manage the thoughts that come from the chimp in telling me that I don't want to do something, but then actually going, do you know what? To be honest, I really don't mind doing it, and then just going at it, working at it, and getting it done. So yeah, again, if you haven't listened to it, I definitely highly recommend that you take the time to read. Excuse me. Take the time to read or to listen to the audiobook as I do. Then the second resource that I've got, so I know I said the read and the reading and the listening one was sort of a package, a pair. Chimp Paradox, go and check it out. The second one for me, what I have watched in the podcast is, this one is a podcast, but I put watched because it is a Barbell Shrug podcast, and they do post video with it, which I do really enjoy, and that's actually part of the reason why I decided to also go with video. One of the big, I know podcasts can perhaps not so interesting to watch, but for me, I do enjoy watching their stuff, so video has been something that I've wanted to do with the podcast, as well as just the audio, of course, with it being a podcast, so I can put the video on YouTube. But yeah, the watched segment for me this week is Barbell Shrugs episode with Amanda Bucci. I've watched it twice. I've listened to it twice, and I think it gives a really good insight if you are interested in sort of building out your personal brand, because that is something that she has done very, very extensively. She talks a lot about her journey through starting, where she went from having 6,000 to 100,000 YouTube subscribers. Granted, was a couple of years ago, but still super interesting story, all the way through to where she is now as an entrepreneur and where she's going with her business development stuff, which is all very, very super interesting. That's one that, to really get the benefit from, I think you will have to listen and watch all the way through. But yeah, and it talks all about being yourself online and putting yourself out there and not being afraid of perhaps the negative comments that you might get, but ultimately it is everything you put out should be, for the most part, your opinion, what you think, and in general, opinions are never wrong. That's why they're opinions. So I think having the confidence, and what I took away from that is, from that podcast and that video, is that having the confidence to go and sort of put out the content and put out and be yourself online without worrying about what other people think, about what other people say to you, I think is hugely important in terms of if you want to build your brand and build out your audience, but then also for yourself as well, for being the person that you want to be. Being yourself in the content that you put out is hugely important. So what I'm actually going to do, I'm going to take a quick break there. Slight change to what I said at the start, but excuse me, I'm going to take a quick break. We'll come back because the next two topics sort of lead into each other. So when we come back, I'm going to talk about my current training, and why it looks that way. And then I will get into, that leads into a little bit of a client interaction that I had this week. We're good.
Hey guys, thank you so much for listening to the podcast. I really do appreciate your time. So as a thank you for tuning in, we're offering you 1 month of fully individualized custom programming with full access to myself as your head coach, along with access to a Fitbot account and full nutrition guidance as each of our individual clients gets. So to get involved, fire us an email at info@fortemtraining.com. include your name and what episode you saw this advert on, and I'll get right back at you to get you set up with your Fitbot account and to get you going on your first month of free programming.
Awesome. Hey guys, what is going on, and welcome back to part 2 of episode 3 of the Fortem Training Podcast with me, head coach and owner Kieran Douglas Jones. Those of you that are watching over on YouTube, okay, we are back. Apologies for that technical difficulty, switch the battery out on the camera. So like I was saying, those of you that are watching, you'll see that we are now in a new location. We have moved inside to the outside shed, or the summer house as it is more aptly named, because it was getting a little bit windy outside there in the back garden, and also the clouds passing through the sun was playing a little bit of havoc with the lighting on the camera. So we're inside, we are still got the doors open, it's still pretty nice, hence the sunglasses, the sun is shining in here. So those of you that are watching, you'll also see for the benefit of the listeners, my dog is sat next to me on the floor here. You can see him over there on the video. But yeah, anyway, we are back, part 2. I had to get myself a quick drink. It's just like a little trouble coughing there at the end of part 1. But yeah, so to get this part off and running, current training. That is what we're talking about. So my current training, how it looks, why it looks that way, and that will actually lead nicely on into the last part, which will be talk a little bit about a client interaction that I have had this week with one of our clients. So yeah, my current training, and coming to the end of the rugby season. We are actually at time of recording, the final game is this evening, final match of the season is this evening, which will mean no more training as of today. So yeah, this is no more training. That means my CrossFit training will now take precedence for the next 8 to 10-ish weeks before we get back into pre-season for next season. So yeah, my current training, and sort of over the past couple of weeks, my current training for the moment is mostly consisted of testing out workouts that are either sent through to clients, testing out workouts ahead of programming clients or testing out workouts ahead of coaching the classes over at Vision Fitness down in Whitland, which is about 2 minutes away from myself from Fortem Training HQ. So I coach a class down there on Tuesday evenings, Thursday mornings. So we have a couple of individuals come down to that class. So most of my training, for the most part, is testing out the Metcon work. In particular, is testing out workouts before they get programmed for those classes, or before they get programmed for clients. And the reason I do that is that, so I'm not just giving clients something and going, here you go, get on with that, that's your workout, go and do it. It's doing them beforehand gives me an idea of whether they are programmed correctly for the stimulus that we're trying to get out of it, which is a huge part of testing out the workouts ahead of giving them to the class or giving them to individuals to go in their own programming. Because you could program something, that you want to test out, give it to a client, and you think they might finish it in 8 minutes, it takes them 20 minutes. So obviously that is an extreme example, and to go that far wrong, you'd have to be doing something fairly different. But in terms of making sure that each of the workouts, or particularly some of the workouts that you're not too sure about, testing them out is a great way to make sure that they are giving the clients the intended stimulus, so the workout does give the stimulus for which you intended to program it for. A good example of that would be something like if you wanted to really push the anaerobic system, would be going for something like a 3 rounds for time, 9 hang power cleans, 5 burpees over the bar, or 5 burpees. That's just a quick example of a super short workout that can take anywhere between probably 3 minutes and 2.5 up to probably 5 minutes. Is a pretty good test of the anaerobic system, and that's one that we use with our clients. It's a pretty tough one actually, and one that I've done a couple of times, and I tell you, it does not get easier every single time. It never ever gets easier. But yeah, so my current training looks a little bit like that, but the overarching factor with my current training, aside from testing the workouts, is consistency. This is going to be for the first time since coming back from holiday a couple of weeks ago, about 3 weeks ago. This is going to be the first time where I've got the first time for a good few weeks where I'm going to have an extended period, like more than 2 or 3 weeks, where I can fully focus on my training and set out a plan for the next sort of 8 to 10 weeks, and really go at those next 8 to 10 weeks with some consistency and try and make some big gains in particularly strength, maybe a little bit of size, try and pack on a little bit of size, particularly upper body, shoulders for me in particular, which tend to be where I am lacking the most strength, strict press, as well as obviously Metcon work for working on the conditioning before we get back into pre-season, which will start likely the beginning of July for me. So always an enjoyable time of the year. For those of you that play team sports and have participated in pre-season events, always know that it is pretty tough. So yeah, I'm looking forward to sort of the next 8 to 10 weeks of training. We can really build on some consistency, not necessarily going for perfection. That's something that I have really tried to implement for myself, both in my nutrition. Sleep for me has been a big one, and my training is working on consistency over perfection. So consistency being like, instead of being looking for perfection and 100%, and unless you're at 100% for that day, you're at 30%. Having that consistency to be at 85, 90, 95%, and giving yourself that 15 to 5% leeway, whether it is every other day or on a daily basis, to keep you consistent and moving in the right direction for the long term. Because I think for me in particular, and with my training, I think consistency is the biggest factor that leads to progression, leads to the biggest progression, which I think can be said for most people, if not all people. I think consistency is obviously an overarching factor that leads to long-term gains. But I think for me in particular, with my training not being that consistent, having to work it around matches and work it around training, working around rugby sessions, then having an 8 to 10 week block where I can really build in some consistency on like 5-6 days a week consistency, I'm really looking forward to, and I think I'm really looking forward to making some big progress in a number of areas. And I think relating that then on to something for me which has been a conflict is my sleep. I think more in the past couple of months I've really struggled with my sleep and my sleep patterns, struggling to get to sleep and get enough sleep, and sort of realizing that was where I was losing out in terms of my training. So I've started to really dial in my sleep hygiene and build consistency in my sleep hygiene so that it becomes habit, and then habit becomes lifestyle, and then is around for the long term. And that's definitely getting better. It's getting hugely better. And what I mean in building consistency in my own sleep hygiene personally for me is trying to get to sleep or get everything switched off. I'm lying in bed by about 9:45, and then trying to go to sleep then from there straight away, or as quickly as I can around 10 o'clock. Turning screens off as well. I've quite a habit of, as many of us do, I had quite a habit of sitting there and scrolling through over on Instagram, scrolling through everything on Instagram and just looking, and then going on Facebook, and then before you know it, you get down some very deep rabbit holes with some very funny videos and those sorts of things. So turning screens off before getting to sleep has been a big stumbling block previously, but it's something that I have been dialing in and becoming more consistent with, is trying to rid myself of all screens just at least half an hour before I go to bed, if not 45 minutes, maybe even up to an hour. But it is difficult in some cases when you are coaching late and you get back and you've got emails to answer or messages to answer, those sorts of things. It does become difficult, but it's something that I'm trying to work on. And it all comes back to just having consistency, and having a consistency that is going to help me long term to make sort of lasting changes to my sleep patterns, and not necessarily my patterns, but sleep hygiene, help me get better sleep, more restful sleep, which is then going to aid my training, help me just be in a better place physically, whether it is for performance or for health. So then to relate this on to the final part, which was a client interaction that I've had this week, and it relates again, it's very much the same thing, talking about consistency over perfection. For the benefit of the listeners, I'm just looking down at my notebook here. Those of you watching, you can see there, I've just got a couple of notes written down, which is why I'm looking downwards at this book. Consistency over perfection, and I had a interaction with a client this week who was just going through an assessment week on their nutrition. They were with us, part of the nutrition process is clients will go through an assessment where they will just physically write down, or whether it's on a PDF or an Excel, or physically print and write down everything that they consume in as much detail as possible for 7 days. So this client had filled it all in, sent it back, and then followed it up with a message that said, I'm paraphrasing, but it said somewhere along the lines of, here's my nutrition plan. I've had a pretty good week, but I had a really bad weekend. Excuse me. I've had a really good week. Here's my nutrition plan, but I have had a really bad weekend. So not that there's anything wrong with having a bad weekend, but this relates really closely to having consistency over perfection. Having a bad weekend can essentially had a good week and then a bad weekend, which leads me to believe that what is happening is some obviously things change from week to week, but in that case, what seems to come to me is that they are working really hard during the week to be as perfect as they can, Monday to Friday, and then going on the weekend and absolutely just binging out and throwing everything out of the window, going hell for leather, eating this and eating that. And that, for the long term, I think is a difficult thing to do. It is a difficult place to be in, a difficult mindset to be in. Having a good week and then a bad weekend is a very difficult mindset to be in that it seems as though you are sabotaging yourself every single weekend. No, you work hard through the week, and then you go those 2 days on the weekend where you are sabotaging yourself and taken away from all the hard work that you put in Monday to Friday. So I think, so what we had then with that client was trying to help them understand that consistency is far better than perfection. So we're working on rebalancing how they see their Monday to Friday and the weekends, so to try and help them have a little bit more consistency rather than going Monday to Friday at 100% and then going 30% clean on the weekends. We're trying to sort of dial that back to sort of 85-90% clean through the week, giving yourself a little bit of leeway and then holding that through to the weekend as well. So we're going 85% 7 days a week or 90% 7 days a week, rather than going 100% Monday to Friday and then absolutely hammering yourself with this and that on the weekends and absolutely sabotaging yourself into the ground, and then you come to Monday and you feel like shit after eating shit all weekend, and then you've got to try and dial everything back in to 100% after eating shit for 2 days. So that is a super difficult place to be in. So at the moment, the way we're working through that with the client is sort of educating. And I know I mentioned in episode 2, I talked a little bit about it, the last episode. Educating plays a big role in what we do with our clients and trying to help them understand what we're trying to do, what we're giving them, and how they can then make decisions based on the education that they get and make decisions for themselves. Because fundamentally, when people can decide for themselves and they understand how things work and how they can then implement things, I think it makes it much easier for them to understand why they are doing things and why this is going to help them get to their goals and get to where they want to be. So yeah, that is the sort of the takeaway from that client interaction, is that consistency is much more important than being perfect, because being perfect is, it's difficult. It's difficult. Being perfect is near on impossible. I think to be perfect. No one is perfect. It's difficult to be perfect with your nutrition, and I think if we aim for perfection, we're going to fall a little bit short, which is absolutely fine, because being at 100% all the time is not a sustainable way to go in about your nutrition. And I think from previous experience, from working with clients, and from having the previous experience, those that really do try and aim for that perfection and be that perfect, be either 100% or 20%, is a very difficult mindset to then be in and try and reach your goals within that mindset, because you just end up sabotaging yourself every single weekend. So yeah, that is something that we are working on with that particular client, and we are dialing things in, educating them on having consistency over perfection, and that is actually going to be it for this episode, for episode 3 of the Fortem Training Podcast. I certainly hope you enjoyed. I certainly hope you could take something away from this episode. If you get a chance, go and read or listen to the Chimp Paradox. Go and watch the Barbell Shrugged episode with Amanda Bucci if you're interested in online stuff. If you're interested on social media, YouTube, that sort of thing, that will be right up your alley. If you do have any questions on anything that we've covered, or if you do have any questions at all, and you want answered on the podcast, then please do get in touch. Fire us a DM over on Instagram at fortem.training or Fortem Training on Facebook, or get in touch with myself personally on Instagram at Kieran Douglas Jones, or send an email to info@fortemtraining.com, and we will answer your questions over the next couple of episodes. So the plan for the next couple of episodes, I think the next few most definitely are going to be very similar to what we've done so far, very similar to this sort of episode in terms of structure. Then longer term in the future, we are looking at bringing on some guests. We've got some provisionally lined up, although I cannot confirm as yet, but I certainly hope that bringing those guests on will give you a different point of view, hopefully help you learn, because I am really interested to learn from people that we get on the podcast. So I think as much as I want to learn, I'm really interested in learning as much as I can from other people. So why not make it into some podcast episodes, have them come on here, and hopefully help some of you listeners or watchers over on YouTube learn at the same time. Thank you so much for watching. I have been Kieran Douglas Jones, owner and head coach of Fortem Training. I will see you, and you will hear me again in episode number 4. Thanks for listening.